Hey everyone, how are you doing? I'm Eric from Lonesome Reader, and I'm keeping my Christmas tree for as long as possible, just because it's pretty to look at, isn't it? But Christmas is over, it is almost the new year, it's almost 2019, it's time to start planning what we want to read in the new year, and I always get really excited around this time, starting to plan a TBR for the new year, because, you know, it just feels like a fresh slate of books, and I always get really excited reading about the books that are going to be published in the new year. So I wanted to highlight some of my absolute favorite that I'm looking forward to reading in the new year. So I'm gonna talk about, I have a huge pile of books here to talk about, and but I'll go through all of them and talk about a little bit about them and why I'm so interested in reading them. First off, I would be remiss not to mention this novel, Marlon James' Black Leopard, Red Wolf, which is coming out at the end of February, and I've already talked about it quite a lot, so I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail now, because I made a whole separate video like raving about this novel because I couldn't wait to read it, so I just jumped right in and read this massive volume of the first part of a new literary fantasy trilogy by the great Booker-winning author, and it is magnificent and wonderful and unlike anything else I've read before, so it is so wonderful. Really recommend reading this. Then the first book that I want to talk about is feels very appropriate to talk about excitement and love of books, and that's the library book by Susan Orlean, who wrote The Orchid Thief, and which I've never read, and I've never read anything by her before, but this sounds amazing. So it investigates the story, fictionally investigates the story of what happened behind a fire which was set in the Los Angeles Public Library in 1986, I think. And there was a big mystery surrounding who set off this fire. And so she fictionally explores that in this novel, as well as like our relationships with libraries and books. And so sounds, you know, like the perfect the book lovers kind of book to start the year with, you know. When All Is Said by Anne Griffin, this has been getting a lot of praise from Irish authors like John Boyne and Donal Ryan, and it's about an 84-year-old man who's sitting in a bar and he's kept a number of secrets all of his life, and he's finally ready to tell his story. So he tells the story of 5 different people and raises his glass to these 5 different people and why they've meant so much to him in his life. I think it sounds like a really interesting novel. Out of the Woods by Luke Turner. This has a really beautiful, lovely cover, and it's a memoir about Luke Turner's life after the end of a very significant relationship in his life, which forces him to confront a lot of things that he's been suppressing, not thinking about for a long time. And so it's about his life dealing with his bisexuality and his religious upbringings and facing a lot of demons that he's been avoiding. I've heard such high praise about this, so really looking forward to this memoir. Wolf Country by Tunde Farrand. This novel is a dystopian novel, and I've been really into reading dystopian fiction lately, and a lot has been being published, so I guess there's just something in the air which has been producing all this dystopian fiction. And this is set in the year 2050 in London, when a small elite really owns and runs the country, and aging has been abolished. Instead of retirement, there's euthanasia for the aging population. And so, yeah, it's a very sort of grim-looking future, but is obviously speculating on a lot of anxieties that are preoccupying us at this age and time. Adele by Leila Slimani. I loved her novel Lullaby, which was published at the beginning of 2018, and I think it was called The Perfect Nanny in the United States. Is that right? But this new novel, Adele, is about a woman who seems to have the perfect life. She has a really successful career as a journalist, but she finds herself drawn towards addictive behavior like drinking and gambling and sex, and so it's her battling with these vices of falling into overindulgence in these different vices. So I'm really interested to read about that struggle. Where Reason Ends by Yiyun Li. I loved her memoir, which was called Dear Friend, From My Life, I Write to You in Your Life. And this is a novel about a female writer whose son commits suicide. And so she's struggling to come to terms with this and doing that by the best way she knows how, which is writing. And so writing out about his life and trying to understand his experiences and what brought him to this tragic end. Mouthful of Birds by Samanta Schweblin. And look at how beautiful this cover is. It's so gorgeous. I absolutely love it. And I loved her debut novel, which was called Fever Dream, which was really tense, suspenseful, short novel, which sort of blended the fantastical with the reality, and so that sort of border edge between what's real and what's just imagined. And it sounds like these short stories continue on in that vein, sort of darkly exploring this territory between the imagination and reality. Stubborn Archivist by Yara, Rodrigues, Fowler. And this is a debut novel, which sounds quite experimental, that it sort of explores the lines between our sense of ourselves and our bodies. And it does that through someone who records all the details of a life to see what it adds up to. Sounds quite interesting, and it's had blurbs from authors I really like Olivia Lane and Fiona Melrose. Lanny by Max Porter, and I read his debut novel Grief is the Thing with Feathers, and it was so original and different, really unlike anything else I'd ever read. And this novel Lanny sounds quite similar, like nothing else that's ever been written. So it's about an English village, which is simultaneously about the present and the past. I think it's sort of inhabited by people from both the present and the past. And there's a man named Dead Papa Toothwort who views a number of different people in the village and is commenting on them and thinking about them. So it sounds really interesting and original. And Max Porter is one of the most exciting new writers that we have today. So I think this novel is going to be really worth reading. An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. This is finally being published in the UK. I know it came out in the US already and was on Barack Obama's summer reading list and was on the Oprah's book club pick, and it's finally coming to the UK, and I'm very excited to read it. So it's a story of a marriage, a young couple who seem to have everything going for them, really good prospects in their lives, until the man is arrested and sentenced to a long prison term, which the wife knows that he didn't commit. So it explores that whole challenge. And I'm so excited to read this story that lots of people have been going on and on about. Memories of the Future by Siri Hustvedt. And Siri Hustvedt is a novelist I love. I think she's so fascinating and intellectual and really interesting, kind of challenging novels that she writes. And with each novel she writes, I think she's getting better and better. So I'm really excited about this new novel, which is about the relationship between two women who live next door to each other. And through the walls, one can hear the other speaking, giving these monologues. And so she starts to record down the monologues of her neighbor, and till they finally meet. And then many years later, they meet again, and the notebooks are uncovered, and it explores their whole relationships, I guess, with each other and with themselves, this monologue that the neighbor has been having with herself. And so, yeah, it sounds like a really interesting, curious story. The Binding by Bridget Collins, and I was lucky enough to be sent this beautiful new proof. It looks really gorgeous, but the story sounds really excellent. So it's about a man who takes up a profession of bookbinding, but it has a sort of magical quality to it where he can bind in books the memories that people want to forget. So if they're feeling a particular grief or they have a bad memory that they want to forget. It can be bound in a book and forgotten, but it's about sort of the consequences of that as well. So it sort of sounds like the film Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, really exploring a lot of these ideas about memory and what we need to forget and what we need to remember. The Pact We Made by Leila Al-Ammar. This is a debut novel set in modern-day Kuwait about a young woman who is close to turning 30, and she feels like she is living like a dual sort of life, where on the one hand she has a quite successful, promising career and really good friends, and then on the other hand she has her family who's pressuring her to get married, and she's been made to feel like she's going to be a spinster if she doesn't get married soon. So it's about the tension between that and finding what she wants in her life and how to find a peaceful coexistence between these two aspects of her life. The Doll Factory by Elizabeth MacNeil, and I know a number of people have been talking about this. It's one of the most anticipated debuts of 2019, and so it's a historical novel set in 1850 and 1851 in London during the Great Exhibition, and is about a young woman who is a doll maker who dreams of becoming an artist, and I'm really excited to read it. I just want to get lost in a great historical novel. You Will Be Safe Here by Damien Barr. This novel I've been looking forward to ever since I first heard it was going to be coming out last summer. Damien Barr is a journalist and a playwright, and he wrote a memoir before, but this is his very first novel, and he also hosts the most fabulous literary salon in London, where it gets really interesting authors in to have this big glitzy event, and it's really wonderful. So this novel sounds so fascinating and interesting. It's set in South Africa during two different time periods. So in the first time period, it's the year 1901 during the Boer War, and a mother and a son are taken into a concentration camp where they're told they'll be safe by the English. And then the other part takes place in the year 2010, where a young man is sent to a reform camp where they apparently make men out of boys. And so, yeah, it sounds like such an interesting exploration about war and identity and sexuality, and I'm so excited to read it. Constellations by Sinead Gleeson. This is a beautiful cover, and this is another journalist who has written, this is her first book of essays, which is about art and illness and ghosts and grief and different ways of seeing. And she is such a perceptive and interesting journalist. She's edited a couple anthologies, which I read. She's such a great cheerleader for Irish women's writing. And I'm so excited to read her first book of essays. Little Boy by Lawrence Ferlinghetti. And I was so shocked when this came through the mail, because I had no idea that he was still alive. He actually turns 100 in 2019. He's one of the last surviving members of the Beat Generation, and this is a short novel about a boy's life through the 20th century. So growing up in the early 1900s and living through the war and witnessing all the changes in the country at that time. And yeah, so I'm so intrigued to read this. The Polyglot Lovers by Lena Wolf. And I had read her previous novel called Bret Easton Ellis and the Other Dogs, which was so original and interesting. And this novel sounds really good. It's about two people trying to find love in the modern age through online dating and through different methods of meeting people. And yeah, I think she's such an original writer. I'm so intrigued to see what she's come up with next. The Heavens by Sandra Newman. This is another one of the most anticipated novels of next year that a lot of people have been talking about. And it sounds like such an original novel. So it's another love story and another novel that's set in two different time periods, but very different. So it's in the year 2000. There's a couple living in New York City who've fallen in love. And then the woman of the couple, she falls asleep and wakes up in the 1500s in the Elizabethan era in London, and another life that she has in the Elizabethan era sounds like really wild and crazy. And I'd read Sandra Newman's previous novel, The Country of Ice Cream Star, which was, I think it was shortlisted for the Bailey's Prize at that time, and yeah, was such an incredible imaginative work that I'm so excited to see what she's come up with next. My Name is Monster by Katie Hale. This sounds like another really original novel, which is meant to be a blend sort of Robinson Crusoe and Frankenstein. It's about a female character named Monster whose parents have been killed in a sickness, and she washes up on the shores in Scotland and tries to build a new life for herself in a world without men. So yeah, it sounds really original and interesting, sort of coincides with, in 2019 is the 300th anniversary of the publication of Robinson Crusoe. So yeah, really intrigued about this novel. So those are all the physical novels that I have. Then I want to talk about a few more books that I'm really excited about that I don't have copies of yet, but which sound really exciting and interesting. So Joyce Carol Oates has a new novel coming out called My Life as a Rat. And this is a novel about a young woman who is banished from her family after she tells the truth about some of her own brothers who committed a horrific act, and she's sort of expelled from her family and her church and everything she's known, and has to find a new life for herself. So it sort of sounds on the lines of her novel We Were the Mulvaneys, with similar themes. But it's really interesting. This novel she wrote was originally a short story called Curly Red, and I don't know of many instances where Joyce Carol Oates has taken short stories and then thought that there's more to tell about this story and then written a whole novel from it. So I'm really excited to read this. Then there is a novel called Independence, two different words, Independence, by Sara Ledipo-Menyeki. And this is a novel about a woman who travels from Nigeria to England in the 1960s to find a new life for herself. And it's about the tension between her Nigerian sense of herself and her new life in England. That sounds really good. That's coming out from Cassava Press. And then there's new novels from Helen Oyeyemi, who I think is such an incredible, fascinating, imaginative writer. She has a novel called Gingerbread that a lot of people are looking forward to. Then Rowan Hissio Buchanan has a new novel coming out called Starling Days that I'm really looking forward to because I loved her debut novel. And then there are other very established writers who have sequels coming out. Like I already mentioned in a previous video I made, that 2019 seems to be the year of literary sequels. So there's the novel Olive Again by Elizabeth Strout, a new novel that continues with her character Olive Kitteridge. And of course, Margaret Atwood has a sequel coming out to The Handmaid's Tale called The Testaments, and all really excited about that, or some of us are not excited about it, as I talked about in a video I made. And then there is a poet named Ocean Vuong who has his first novel coming out called On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. That sounds so good, and I'm really excited about. So those are a whole slew of books that I'm really excited to read in 2019. Let me know if I've perked your interest in any of them, or if in fact you've read any of them yourself already, and what you think I should prioritize and read first. So I'll put links in the description below where you can buy all of these books, or pre-reserve copies of all these books before they come out. So yeah, it's going to be a really exciting year. Let me know also in the comments what you're most looking forward to reading in the new year. So I hope you're doing well, hope you're making good reading plans, and Happy New Year, everyone. I will speak to you again very soon. Bye.